Emma Chen was once a bubbly 3-year-old who talked incessantly, singing Disney songs in the grocery store, narrating every moment of her day with infectious enthusiasm. Her parents, David and Sarah Chen, could barely get a word in edgewise during dinner conversations. She would describe the color of clouds, the taste of strawberries, the way sunlight danced on water. Her babbling was constant, joyful, and utterly characteristic of a child discovering language and the power it held. Neighbors would wave from their yards, and Emma would shout elaborate hellos, inventing stories about imaginary friends and magical adventures. She had a special way of pronouncing certain words, calling spaghetti spaghetti and strawberries strawberries, that made her entire family laugh with delight. Her preschool teachers described her as exceptionally verbal and socially confident. They predicted she would become a natural communicator, perhaps a teacher or performer. Her grandparents treasured recordings of her voice, playing them back just to hear her infectious giggle and endless commentary about life. But that was before the incident in her driveway on a Tuesday afternoon in June. That was before everything changed. It started like any ordinary day. Sarah had taken Emma outside to play while she watered the garden. The weather was perfect, sunny, warm, with a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves of the old oak tree in their front yard. Emma was chasing butterflies, her pink sneakers pounding against the concrete driveway, her voice rising in delighted squeals each time she spotted one. She wore her favorite yellow dress with cartoon characters, the one she insisted on wearing every other day. Her curly black hair was tied back with matching yellow ribbons that kept falling loose as she ran. Sarah smiled from near the garden hose, content in the simple pleasure of watching her daughter play freely in their safe suburban neighborhood. Then came the sound, a terrible, unmistakable sound, the screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal, the shattering of glass. A car had careened into their driveway at high speed, hitting their neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, who had been walking past their house carrying groceries. The impact was violent and sudden. Mr. Rodriguez's body flew backward, groceries scattering across the pavement like confetti. The car, a dark sedan, sat idling for just a moment, and then it reversed abruptly and sped away, disappearing down the quiet street in a cloud of exhaust. Emma watched everything. Sarah's scream pierced the air as she ran toward the injured man. She immediately called 911, cradling Mr. Rodriguez's head while trying to keep him conscious. Neighbors emerged from their homes, shocked and horrified. Within minutes, sirens wailed through the quiet street. Paramedics arrived and took over, working frantically to stabilize Mr. Rodriguez before rushing him to the hospital. Police cars blocked the street. Detectives began their investigation. The neighborhood that had been so peaceful moments before transformed into a scene of chaos and trauma. But no one was paying attention to Emma. The little girl stood frozen in the middle of the driveway, her butterfly net hanging limply at her side. Her face had gone pale. Her body trembled. She had seen the whole thing, the car, the impact, the moment Mr. Rodriguez's body hit the ground. She had heard his cry of pain. She had witnessed violence in its rawest form, and her 3-year-old mind had no framework for processing such horror. When Sarah finally noticed her daughter standing alone, she rushed over and scooped her up, holding her tight while Emma's entire body shook with shock. "It's okay, baby. It's okay," Sarah whispered, though nothing was okay. Emma didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply went silent, her arms wrapped around her mother's neck, her eyes staring blankly at nothing. That night, Emma wouldn't speak. Sarah and David tried everything, asking gentle questions, showing her favorite toys, reading her favorite stories. Emma would nod or shake her head in response, but her voice had disappeared. They assumed it was temporary shock. Surely, with time and comfort, she would return to normal. But days turned into weeks, and Emma's silence persisted. 1 week passed with no words. 2 weeks. A month. 3 months. She had not spoken a single word since that Tuesday afternoon in June. Her voice had simply vanished, as if the trauma had reached into her throat and stolen it away. The Chen family embarked on a desperate journey through the medical establishment. They visited Dr. Morrison, their pediatrician, who examined Emma thoroughly and found nothing physically wrong. Sometimes children respond to trauma by becoming selective with their speech, Dr. Morrison explained carefully. It's called selective mutism. With time and therapy, most children recover fully. The words were meant to be reassuring, but they felt hollow to David and Sarah, who watched their vibrant daughter withdraw further each day. They tried speech therapy with Dr. Patricia Liu, a specialist who worked with children who had speech delays. Dr. Liu would sit with Emma, using puppets and games to encourage vocalization. Emma would smile sometimes at the puppet's antics, but her lips remained sealed. After 6 weeks of therapy with no progress, Dr. Liu gently suggested they see a child psychologist. Dr. James Morrison, no relation to their pediatrician, was a child psychologist with 20 years of experience. He specialized in trauma and anxiety in young children. During their first session, he observed Emma carefully, noting her withdrawn demeanor, her flat affect, her complete lack of verbal communication. "Has anything else happened?" he asked David and Sarah. "Any other stressors or changes in her environment?" Sarah told him about the accident, about witnessing Mr. Rodriguez being hit, about the sudden onset of silence immediately after. Dr. Morrison nodded knowingly. "This is definitely trauma-related," he confirmed. "Her mind is protecting her by shutting down speech. It's a coping mechanism, though not a healthy long-term one." Emma began therapy twice a week. Dr. Morrison used play therapy techniques, allowing Emma to express herself through drawing and play rather than words. Over the weeks, Emma's drawings became dark, black scribbles, red marks crossing the page, stick figures lying on the ground. The drawings were her voice now, screaming silently about the horror she had witnessed. Sarah found herself weeping in the kitchen late at night, Sarah's dreams haunted by the day she couldn't protect her daughter from the terrible truth of the world. David threw himself into work, unable to process the guilt of having been at the office when it happened. Emma's older brother, Michael, felt neglected as their attention focused entirely on their silent sister. The entire family structure had shifted around Emma's silence, everyone orbiting the void where her voice used to be. Emma's kindergarten teacher reported that she sat alone at lunch, watching other children play with an expression of profound sadness. She participated in activities but never volunteered answers. When asked direct questions, she would either nod, shake her head, or simply stare straight ahead. Other children gradually stopped trying to interact with her. Emma became invisible, not physically, but socially. The bubbly, talkative girl who had charmed everyone was gone, replaced by this quiet, withdrawn child who seemed to exist in a world all her own. By the end of the 3rd month, the family had begun to accept that perhaps this was Emma's new reality. Perhaps she would never speak again. The thought terrified them more than anything they could articulate. What kind of life would Emma have? How would she express herself, advocate for herself, connect with the world? The silence that had started as a temporary response to trauma now felt permanent, immutable, like a prison with no key. It was in this moment of despair, when the family had nearly given up hope, that Detective Marcus Webb would knock on their door with an extraordinary proposition. Detective Marcus Webb had been working the hit-and-run case for 3 months, and it was driving him crazy. He was a man obsessed with justice, someone who couldn't rest until every piece of a puzzle fit perfectly into place. At 47 years old, with 22 years on the Portland Police Department, Webb had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when something didn't add up. And in this case, plenty didn't add up. The victim, 45-year-old Roberto "Bobby" Rodriguez, was a beloved elementary school teacher who had been struck down in a quiet residential neighborhood on a lazy Tuesday afternoon. He had suffered 2 broken legs, a fractured pelvis, internal bleeding, and a severe head injury. He spent 2 weeks in a medically induced coma. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive, though the physical therapy ahead would be long and grueling. The hit-and-run itself had been witnessed by only one person, Sarah Chen, who had been in her garden when the car struck her neighbor. She had provided a description: a dark sedan, possibly navy blue or black, moving at high speed. She hadn't gotten the license plate. The car had reversed and fled so quickly that neighbors who emerged from their homes caught only glimpses of it disappearing around a corner. The security cameras on the few houses in the neighborhood weren't positioned to capture the street clearly. It was as if the driver had known exactly how to hit and run without being identified. But Webb knew something others didn't. He had spent countless hours reviewing neighborhood traffic cameras from surrounding blocks, cross-referencing vehicle registrations, interviewing residents multiple times. He had found a pattern. 3 weeks before the hit-and-run, Sarah Chen's brother-in-law, Thomas Chen, had been cited for reckless driving 2 blocks away. The citation report noted that he had been driving a 2015 dark blue Nissan Altima at an excessive speed through a residential zone. Webb pulled Thomas's driving record and found multiple speeding tickets over the past 5 years, several instances of aggressive driving complaints, and even a past DUI that had resulted in a suspended license for 6 months. Webb obtained a warrant to inspect Thomas's vehicle. The Nissan Altima showed signs of recent collision damage on the front end, damage that could match the incident. The paint chips from the scene matched the vehicle's color, but here's where the evidence became frustratingly incomplete. There were no eyewitnesses to positively identify Thomas as the driver. There were no clear photos of the vehicle at the scene. The forensic evidence was circumstantial. A good defense attorney could poke holes in the case, create reasonable doubt, and potentially get Thomas acquitted. Webb needed something more concrete. He needed someone to place Thomas at the scene, someone to identify him as the driver. He needed a witness. That's when he learned about Emma. It was during a follow-up interview with Sarah Chen that she mentioned, almost in passing, that her 3-year-old daughter had witnessed the accident. Webb's ears perked up immediately. "She saw the whole thing happen?" he asked carefully. Sarah nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "She saw everything, and then she stopped talking. She hasn't said a word in 3 months." Webb felt a surge of hope mixed with profound sadness. A 3-year-old witness could be the key to solving this case, but extracting testimony from a traumatized 3-year-old was a nearly impossible task. Most judges wouldn't even allow a child that young to testify, considering her unreliable memory and suggestibility. Still, Webb couldn't let this go. He spent hours in his home office, reviewing case files about young child witnesses, reading about trauma responses in toddlers, researching the legality of child testimony in Oregon courts. He consulted with the district attorney, Margaret Sullivan, who was initially skeptical. "A 3-year-old," she said, raising her eyebrows. Even if she could testify, any defense attorney worth his salt would tear her apart on cross-examination. The judge might not even allow it. But Webb was persistent. He showed Sullivan the circumstantial evidence against Thomas, the vehicle damage, the paint chips, the traffic history, the pattern of reckless driving. "We have enough to charge him," Webb argued, "but not enough to guarantee conviction. If we could get Emma to identify him or even just describe what she saw, it could be the tipping point." Sullivan leaned back in her chair, considering. "The child is traumatized. How do you propose we get her to testify?" Webb had an idea, something unconventional, something he'd read about in a case study from California. "What if we didn't push her to testify immediately?" he suggested. "What if we first helped her heal? What if we gave her a reason to want to speak again?" For the next week, Webb researched therapy dogs and their effectiveness with traumatized children. He read about PTSD service animals, therapy animals in courtrooms, the science behind human-animal bonding and its healing properties. He discovered that several police departments across the country had K-9 units trained specifically for victim support and trauma response. He learned about the remarkable effectiveness of therapy dogs in helping children process trauma and regain their voice. That's when Webb thought of Officer Jenna Rodriguez. Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran of the Portland Police Department and the head of their K-9 unit. She was known throughout the department as someone who genuinely cared about people, who had an almost magical ability to connect with victims and witnesses. Webb had worked with her on 3 previous cases and had tremendous respect for her instincts and professionalism. He knew she had a dog, a beautiful golden retriever named Valor, but he wasn't certain about the dog's specific training. He requested a meeting with Officer Rodriguez at the station's break room on a Friday afternoon. Rodriguez arrived with 2 cups of coffee, her perceptive eyes already curious about why Webb wanted to see her. Webb explained the entire situation, the hit-and-run case, the circumstantial evidence, Emma's trauma and selective mutism, his theory that a therapy dog might help the little girl heal and potentially testify. Officer Rodriguez listened intently, her expression growing more animated as Webb spoke. When he finished, she smiled, not because the situation was humorous, but because she understood exactly what he was asking and believed it could work. Valor is certified in victim support, she explained. He's worked with abuse survivors, accident witnesses, children in crisis situations. I've seen him help people find their voice again, literally and figuratively. But this would be different. This would be working with a 3-year-old. It would require incredible patience and consistency. Can you do it? Webb asked, leaning forward. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. Let me meet the family first. Let me assess Emma's situation. But yes, detective, I believe Valor and I can help this little girl speak again. And if she does, Rodriguez trailed off, understanding the implications. If Emma spoke, Thomas Chen would likely face serious charges. If Emma testified, he would likely be convicted. 2 days later, Officer Rodriguez called the Chen family. Sarah was hesitant at first. The idea of involving police further in their daughter's trauma seemed counterintuitive. But Rodriguez spoke with such genuine compassion, such understanding of what they were going through, that Sarah agreed to a meeting. That Sunday afternoon, Officer Rodriguez arrived at the Chen home with Valor. The golden retriever was calm and well-mannered, his presence immediately soothing despite being a police dog. Rodriguez explained her idea to David and Sarah, not forcing Emma to speak, not pushing her to process trauma, but simply allowing Valor's gentle presence to create a safe space where healing could begin naturally. I won't push your daughter, Rodriguez promised. I won't ask her questions about the accident. I won't try to get her to identify anyone. We'll simply let Emma and Valor spend time together. If she chooses to speak, wonderful. If not, we'll celebrate the progress she makes anyway. My goal is her healing, not her testimony. Though, Rodriguez added carefully, if healing does lead to her wanting to share what she saw, that would be a beautiful gift to justice and to her own recovery. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in 3 months, she felt like someone truly understood their situation. When can we start? She asked. Next week, Rodriguez replied. Whenever you're ready. As Officer Rodriguez drove away with Valor sitting in the back seat, David and Sarah looked at each other with a fragile hope they hadn't felt in months. They didn't know it yet, but their daughter's journey back to her voice was about to begin. And it would all start with a golden retriever named Valor, who had no idea he was about to become the most important witness in a criminal case. Detective Marcus Webb stood in the hallway outside the Portland Police Department's conference room, holding a thick manila folder filled with everything he had learned about therapy dogs and their effectiveness with traumatized children. He had spent the entire weekend researching, reading scientific studies, case reports, and testimonials from psychologists and law enforcement officers across the country who had successfully used animal-assisted therapy in victim support. His desk at home was covered in printed articles, highlighted passages, and handwritten notes. His wife, Patricia, had joked that he was becoming obsessed, but Webb couldn't help himself. This case felt different. Emma Chen's silence felt like a personal challenge, a puzzle he was determined to solve. The meeting with Officer Jenna Rodriguez was scheduled for 9 a.m. on Monday morning. Webb arrived early, as he always did, and made fresh coffee in the break room. He had worked with Rodriguez on 3 previous cases: a home invasion where she had helped comfort the elderly victims, a kidnapping case where she had supported a traumatized child, and a sexual assault investigation where Valor's presence had helped the victim feel secure enough to give a detailed statement. Each time, Webb had been amazed by Rodriguez's instincts, her professionalism, and most importantly, her genuine compassion for people in crisis. Rodriguez arrived at 8:55 a.m., 2 minutes early as always. She was a tall woman in her mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical bun, and kind brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to people's souls. She wore her police uniform with quiet dignity, and her presence commanded respect without demanding it. Rodriguez had been with the Portland PD for 15 years, and before that, she had worked as a veterinary technician and animal behaviorist. She had a background that perfectly suited her role managing the K-9 unit, but it was her heart that truly set her apart. "Marcus," she greeted warmly, shaking his hand. "I read the case file you sent me. This is a complex situation." Webb gestured toward the conference room. They settled into comfortable chairs, and Webb walked Rodriguez through every detail, not just the legal aspects of the case, but the human element. He described Emma's vibrant personality before the trauma, the devastating change that had occurred afterward, the family's desperate attempts to help her, the 3 months of silence that had followed. "The question is," Webb explained, "is there any way we can help this child heal while potentially gathering evidence for the prosecution? And I'm not asking you to compromise your ethics or to use valor inappropriately. I'm asking if there's a way to genuinely help Emma that might, as a secondary benefit, also help justice." Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled thoughtfully. She had heard variations of this request before, people hoping that her dog could be used as a tool for their purposes. But Webb was different. She could see in his eyes that he genuinely cared about Emma's well-being, that he wasn't trying to exploit a traumatized child for a conviction. "Tell me about Valor's training," Webb said, "specifically his trauma response work." Rodriguez's face brightened. She loved talking about her dog. "Valor is a 5-year-old golden retriever," she began. "He was initially trained as a service dog for a family with a diabetic child, but he showed exceptional aptitude for emotional support work. About 3 years ago, I obtained specialized certification in victim support and trauma response. Valor and I completed a rigorous training program that teaches him to recognize signs of anxiety, panic, and emotional distress in humans. He's trained to respond by moving close to the person, making physical contact through his body or head, and providing what we call deep pressure therapy." She paused, then continued with more intensity. "What's remarkable about Valor is that he doesn't require verbal communication to work effectively. He reads body language. He understands energy. He responds to emotional states. I've worked with nonverbal autistic children, abused victims who were too traumatized to speak, accident survivors in shock. Valor's presence doesn't demand anything from them. He simply offers unconditional acceptance and safety. Many times, people who refuse to speak to therapists or law enforcement have begun communicating after spending time with Valor." Webb felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align. "So theoretically," he said slowly, "if Emma spent time with Valor without any pressure to perform or communicate, she might naturally begin to feel safe enough to speak again." "Theoretically, yes," Rodriguez confirmed. "But I want to be clear, my primary goal would be her healing. If that healing leads to her ability to testify, that's a wonderful secondary benefit. But I won't use Valor as a manipulation tool. If at any point I feel like we're exploiting Emma's trauma for investigative purposes, I'll stop." "Understood." Webb nodded immediately. "Completely understood. Your ethics are one of the reasons I came to you." Rodriguez stood up and began packing, her mind clearly working through the logistics. "I'll need to meet with the family first. I need to assess Emma's situation, understand her baseline, observe her behavior. I'll need their permission and their trust. This won't work if they feel like we're using their daughter. Once I've established a connection with Emma and she seems comfortable with Valor, we can begin regular sessions." "How long do you think this would take?" Webb asked. "That depends on Emma," Rodriguez said honestly. "Every child processes trauma differently. Some children respond to animal-assisted therapy in weeks. Others take months. Some never fully recover the ability to speak about traumatic events, and that's okay too. They can still heal and move forward in other ways. I won't promise you a timeline because I won't rush a child's healing for the sake of a criminal case." Webb understood. He had hoped for a quick solution, but he knew better. Justice sometimes moved slowly and healing even slower. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to facilitate the introduction," Rodriguez said. "The family will trust a detective more than they'll trust a cop with a dog showing up unannounced. I need you to explain what I'm proposing in a way that emphasizes Emma's welfare, not the investigation. And I need you to be honest with them about what Valor can and cannot do." Over the next 3 days, Webb carefully crafted his approach to the Chen family. He visited them in person, bringing not case files and legal documents, but information about animal-assisted therapy and testimonials from other families who had benefited from similar interventions. He explained Officer Rodriguez's background, her training, and most importantly, her commitment to Emma's well-being above all else. Sarah and David Chen were initially skeptical. The last thing they wanted was for their traumatized daughter to be used as a tool in a criminal investigation. But Webb's genuine care for their daughter's welfare came through in every word. He didn't promise miracles. He didn't suggest that Valor would magically make Emma speak. He simply offered them a possibility, that a trained therapy dog might create a safe space where Emma could begin to heal, and that healing, in whatever form it took, was worth pursuing. "Officer Rodriguez is one of the most ethical professionals I know," Webb assured them. "She will never push Emma. She will never use Valor as a manipulation tool. Her only goal is your daughter's recovery. If that recovery leads to Emma being able to describe what happened, wonderful. But that's not the requirement or the expectation." Sarah looked at David, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. David, after 3 months of watching his daughter suffer in silence, felt something shift inside him. What did they have to lose? Their current approach wasn't working. Emma was getting worse, not better. Perhaps this unconventional solution was exactly what they needed. "When can we meet Officer Rodriguez?" Sarah asked. Webb smiled, sensing the shift in their perspective. "This Sunday," he said. "She'll bring Valor to your home, just an informal meeting, no pressure. See how Emma responds." That Sunday, as Officer Rodriguez pulled up to the Chen house with Valor in the back seat, Webb watched from a distance, hoping that this unconventional solution would be the key that unlocked Emma's voice, and in doing so, also unlocked the path to justice for Mr. Rodriguez and his family. The stage was set. The players were in position. What came next would require patience, compassion, and the extraordinary healing power of one golden retriever named Valor. Webb had faith that it would work, but more importantly, he had faith in Officer Rodriguez's skill and dedication. Whatever happened next, Emma would be in good hands. Officer Jenna Rodriguez arrived at the Chen residence on a sunny Sunday afternoon, the golden retriever sitting calmly in the back seat of her police vehicle. The day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of flowers and fresh-cut grass. Rodriguez had deliberately chosen a time when the neighborhood would be quiet, when there would be minimal distractions or stress for Emma. She had learned through years of experience that the environment mattered enormously when introducing a traumatized child to a therapy animal. Every detail had been carefully considered. Before exiting the vehicle, Rodriguez took a moment to center herself in Valor. She placed her hand on the dog's head, feeling his warm fur beneath her fingers. "Okay, buddy," she whispered. "This is an important one. We need to help this little girl find her way back to herself. Let's show her what love and safety feel like." Valor's tail wagged softly, as if he understood the gravity of their mission. The Chen family had been informed to simply be themselves, to not make a big deal out of the visit, to let things unfold naturally. Sarah had instructed Michael, Emma's older brother, to play quietly in his room so as not to overwhelm his sister with activity and noise. David stood in the driveway, watching as Officer Rodriguez approached with Valor on a loose leash. The detective had described Rodriguez as professional and compassionate, and David could immediately see both qualities in her bearing and expression. "Mr. Chen," Rodriguez greeted warmly, extending her hand. "Thank you for allowing us to visit your family. This is Valor." As if on cue, the golden retriever sat perfectly, his plumed tail sweeping back and forth across the pavement in a gentle rhythm. David found himself smiling despite his nervousness. There was something immediately calming about the dog's presence. Sarah emerged from the house, Emma clutching her hand tightly. The 3-year-old was dressed in her favorite yellow dress, the same one she had worn on the day of the accident, though Sarah had washed it countless times, as if she could somehow erase the trauma along with any physical traces of that terrible afternoon. Emma's dark eyes were wide, cautious, fixed on the large golden dog in the driveway. "This is Emma," Sarah said softly, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. Rodriguez knelt down slowly, making herself smaller and less intimidating. "Hi, Emma," she said in a gentle voice that carried no demands or expectations. "This is Valor. He's a very good boy, and he loves meeting new friends." She didn't try to force interaction or push Emma toward the dog. Instead, she simply sat there, showing through her body language that there was no pressure, no requirement for Emma to do anything she wasn't ready to do. For a long moment, nothing happened. Emma stared at Valor, her small body tense, her breathing shallow. Rodriguez remained perfectly still, giving the child time to process. David and Sarah exchanged anxious glances, wondering if this had been a mistake, if bringing a police dog to their home would only trigger more trauma given the circumstances of Emma's silence. Then something miraculous occurred. Valor, with the intuition that only a well-trained therapy dog possesses, slowly extended his head toward Emma. He didn't jump or bark or exhibit any of the exuberant behaviors typical of golden retrievers. Instead, he moved with deliberate slowness, his movements telegraphed and non-threatening. His brown eyes were soft, almost gentle, filled with an understanding that seemed to transcend species boundaries. Emma watched the dog approach. Her grip on her mother's hand loosened slightly. Valor's nose touched Emma's small hand, and the golden retriever inhaled, familiarizing himself with this new human. Then, incredibly, the dog rested his massive head gently on Emma's lap, as if he had known her all his life. Rodriguez observed the interaction carefully, noting every micro-expression, every subtle shift in Emma's body language. She saw the moment when the child's shoulders began to relax, the instant when her breathing deepened and became more regular. She saw the exact second when Emma's hand, which had been hanging stiffly at her side, reached out and touched Valor's soft fur. It was a tiny gesture, barely noticeable to most observers, but to Rodriguez, it was monumental. Emma had voluntarily initiated physical contact with another living being. For the first time in 3 months, the little girl had reached out to connect. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. David felt his own throat tighten with emotion. Their daughter was responding to someone. After months of withdrawal and isolation, Emma was engaging with the world again, even if only in this small way. "That's beautiful, Emma," Rodriguez said softly, not to force conversation but simply to acknowledge what was happening. "Valor likes you very much. Would you like to sit down with him?" Without waiting for an answer, Rodriguez stood and guided Emma and her parents into the house. She had asked them to prepare a comfortable space, somewhere with soft flooring, natural light, and minimal distractions. The Chens had chosen their living room, moving the coffee table aside and arranging cushions on the carpet. It created a comfortable nest where Emma and Valor could interact freely. Rodriguez suggested that Sarah and David sit nearby but not directly involved in the interaction. "Let Valor and Emma connect," she advised. "Just be present but give them space." She sat on a chair positioned where she could observe both the child and the dog, her trained eyes missing nothing. What followed was a session of wordless communication that was as profound as any therapy session Rodriguez had ever witnessed. Valor rested his head on Emma's lap, and the little girl buried her fingers in his golden fur. Her small face pressed against his neck, and Rodriguez saw her shoulders shake slightly. Whether with tears or something else, she couldn't quite tell. The dog remained perfectly still, offering his body as comfort, his presence as evidence that the world still contained safety and gentleness. For 45 minutes, they simply sat together. Emma stroked Valor's fur, feeling the warm, living body beneath her small hands. The dog's steady breathing seemed to synchronize with hers, and Rodriguez recognized the physiological phenomenon known as heart coherence, when the nervous systems of two beings begin to synchronize, creating profound calm and healing. As the afternoon light shifted and softened, Rodriguez gently suggested that perhaps Valor was getting tired. "He's had a long day," she explained, though in truth, the dog was perfectly fine. She wanted to end the session on a positive note, leaving Emma wanting more, establishing anticipation for the next visit. As Rodriguez prepared to leave with Valor, Emma did something that made everyone in the room catch their breath. She stood up and looked directly at the dog, watching as Rodriguez attached his leash and prepared to walk him back to the vehicle. Emma's lips moved slightly, but no sound emerged. It was as if her voice was trying to work, struggling against the barrier that trauma had erected. "It's okay, sweetheart," Rodriguez said gently. "You don't have to say anything, but we'll come back and you and Valor can spend more time together. Would you like that?" Emma nodded vigorously, her dark eyes tracking every movement the golden retriever made as Rodriguez led him toward the driveway. After they left, Sarah scooped Emma into her arms, holding her tightly. "Did you see that?" she whispered to David. "Did you see her try to speak?" David nodded, his own eyes wet with tears. "I think we found something," he said. "I think we found the key." That night, Emma slept through the night without nightmares for the first time in 3 months. She asked for water, her first words since June, spoken in a barely audible whisper to her mother at 2 in the morning. Just 2 simple words: more water. But they were words, and they were the beginning of a remarkable journey back to wholeness. When Officer Rodriguez received the call from Sarah the next morning about Emma's 2 whispered words, she smiled and immediately scheduled the next session. "Next Wednesday," she told Sarah. "Same time. Valor is already looking forward to seeing her." The healing had begun. Over the next 3 weeks, Emma and Valor became inseparable during their twice-weekly visits to the police station's specially designed comfort room. Officer Rodriguez had arranged for the sessions to take place in a room that had been specifically created for victim support and witness interviews with children. The space was unlike any typical police facility: soft blue walls painted with gentle clouds and stars, plush carpet in warm earth tones, natural light streaming through tall windows that overlooked a small garden. There were cushions scattered throughout, shelves filled with children's books, bins of soft toys, and in one corner, a water fountain where goldfish swam in lazy circles. The entire environment had been designed to feel safe, welcoming, and far removed from the sterile, intimidating nature of typical police facilities. Rodriguez never forced interaction or demanded anything from Emma. Instead, she followed a carefully developed protocol that she had refined over years of working with traumatized children. Each session began the same way. She would bring Valor into the room first, allowing the dog to settle and explore. Then Emma would arrive with her mother, and Rodriguez would suggest a simple activity. Perhaps they would walk through the building's hallways with Valor on a leash, or sit in the garden area while the dog sniffed and investigated his surroundings. The key was to create a context where Emma and Valor could interact naturally, without artificial pressure or forced participation. During the first session after that life-changing initial meeting, Emma was visibly excited to see Valor again. She ran toward the dog, actually ran, with energy and purpose, her face animated in a way her parents hadn't witnessed in months. Valor responded by doing a play bow, his front legs stretched out and his rear end in the air, his tail wagging with infectious enthusiasm. Emma giggled, a real, genuine giggle that emerged from deep in her chest. Sarah, watching from across the room, had to excuse herself to the bathroom so Emma wouldn't see her crying tears of joy. Rodriguez observed everything, taking mental notes about what seemed to trigger positive responses in Emma. She noticed that Emma was most animated when she could initiate contact with Valor, when she had control over the interaction. The dog, as if understanding this intuitively, would often wait for Emma to approach him, to make the first move, reinforcing her sense of agency and control, something that had been stolen from her by the traumatic accident. By the second week, Emma had begun to verbalize slightly more. She used single words and short phrases, speaking in a voice that was still hesitant and quiet but growing slightly stronger each session. "Valor good," she said during one visit, pointing at the dog. "Valor soft," she observed, running her small fingers through his golden coat. These simple declarations were extraordinary evidence that Emma's voice was returning, that the pathways in her brain that controlled speech were beginning to function again. Rodriguez never corrected Emma's grammar or pushed her to speak more clearly. Instead, she simply affirmed what Emma said. "Yes, Valor is very good," she would respond warmly. "And he is very soft. Good observation, Emma." This approach, accepting whatever communication Emma offered without judgment or demand, seemed to encourage more speech rather than inhibit it. One particularly significant moment came during the third week. Emma and Valor were in the garden area of the police station, and a toy ball had rolled out of reach under a bench. Emma looked at the ball, then at Valor, then at Officer Rodriguez. "Valor get ball?" she asked, her voice still small but carrying a note of hope. Rodriguez recognized this as a major breakthrough. Emma was not just speaking but making requests, showing initiative, engaging with her environment in purposeful ways. "Would you like Valor to get the ball?" Rodriguez asked, knowing the answer. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Rodriguez snapped her fingers and gave a subtle hand signal to Valor, who trotted over to the bench, ducked his head underneath, and retrieved the ball. Emma's delight was instantaneous and profound. She clapped her hands, and her mouth formed the shape of a laugh, though the sound was still somewhat restrained. Sarah, who was observing from a nearby chair as she did during each session, felt her heart soar. Her daughter was engaging with the world again. She was making requests. She was expressing joy. The transformation was becoming undeniable. By the fourth session, Emma had developed a routine that she clearly anticipated and enjoyed. Upon arriving at the police station, she would ask, "Valor play?" Rodriguez would respond by bringing out various toys, soft balls, rope toys, squeaky toys, and Emma would play with Valor in an elaborate game of fetch and tug-of-war. The interaction was joyful, physical, and deeply healing. During playtime, Emma's voice grew stronger and more confident. She would laugh, real, unguarded laughter, as Valor bounded around her, his enthusiasm infectious and boundless. One afternoon, as Emma and Valor played, a senior police officer passed by the doorway. He paused, watching the scene with obvious emotion. Later, he spoke privately with Officer Rodriguez. "I've been on the force for 30 years, he told her, "and I've never seen anything as powerful as what you're doing with that little girl and that dog. It's like watching a flower bloom." Rodriguez smiled, but her expression was serious. "This is why I do this work," she said simply. "This is what Valor was born to do." By the fifth and sixth sessions, Emma was speaking in short sentences, still hesitant, still quiet but increasingly coherent and intentional. "Valor my best friend," she announced one afternoon, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck. Rodriguez's heart clenched at those words. Emma was forming attachment, experiencing trust, learning that connection was possible even after trauma. The physical transformation was equally remarkable. The dark circles under Emma's eyes had faded significantly. Her skin had taken on a healthier tone. She was sleeping better at home. Her parents reported that she was having fewer nightmares and that she no longer woke up screaming in the night. Her appetite had improved. She was engaging more with her older brother, Michael, who had begun to join some of the therapy sessions and seemed to understand that his sister was healing. During the 7th session, something particularly significant occurred. Emma and Valor were lying together on a cushion, and Emma was humming, just a few tentative notes at first, then a more confident melody. It took Officer Rodriguez a moment to recognize the tune. Let It Go from Frozen, Emma's favorite movie. The child was humming. After 3 months of silence, Emma's voice was not just speaking but singing, however quietly and hesitantly. Sarah actually gasped when she heard it, her hand flying to her mouth in shock and joy. David, who had accompanied Sarah to this particular session, reached over and squeezed his wife's hand. They both understood the significance of what they were witnessing. Their daughter wasn't just recovering, she was reclaiming pieces of her former self, the bubbly, musical 3-year-old who had existed before the trauma. Rodriguez made detailed notes after each session, documenting Emma's progress for the child psychologist, Dr. James Morrison, who remained involved in her care. The clinical language couldn't capture the emotional reality of what was happening, but the data was clear. Emma's speech was increasing in frequency and complexity. Her affect was brightening. Her engagement with her environment was deepening. Most importantly, her willingness to be vulnerable and to trust was expanding exponentially. On the afternoon of their 8th session, Emma arrived at the police station in a state of visible anticipation. She practically dragged her mother through the doors, eager to see Valor. When the golden retriever appeared, Emma ran to him without hesitation and threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. "I love Valor," she whispered, so quietly that Rodriguez almost missed it. But she hadn't missed it. She had heard those 4 words, "I love Valor," emerge from a child who hadn't spoken a single word 8 weeks earlier. Sarah heard it too. She turned away, unable to contain her tears of gratitude and joy. This was the moment she had prayed for, the moment when she knew for certain that her daughter was going to be okay. The healing wasn't complete. There would still be difficult days ahead, still processing to do, but the path forward was now clear, illuminated by the unconditional love of one golden retriever named Valor. 9 weeks had passed since Emma first met Valor, 9 weeks of gradual healing and incremental progress. Officer Rodriguez had documented every session meticulously, creating a detailed record of Emma's recovery that was both clinically impressive and emotionally profound. The child who hadn't spoken a word was now speaking in full sentences, laughing, singing, and most importantly, engaging with the world around her with renewed curiosity and confidence. But Rodriguez knew, through her years of experience with trauma recovery, that there was often a moment, a singular, pivotal moment, when a child would make the leap from healing to actually confronting what had caused their trauma in the first place. Detective Webb had been patient, consulting regularly with Rodriguez about Emma's progress, but never pushing, never demanding, never suggesting that they use Valor as a tool to extract testimony. He trusted Rodriguez implicitly, and she appreciated his restraint more than she could express. Still, Webb was aware that the criminal case against Thomas Chen would require Emma's testimony eventually. The circumstantial evidence was strong, but without a witness statement, a defense attorney could create reasonable doubt. Webb had begun the preliminary legal work to determine whether a 3-year-old could testify in court, consulting with judges, reviewing case law, preparing for the possibility that Emma's recovery might ultimately serve justice as well as her own well-being. It was during their 10th session together that the breakthrough occurred, though Rodriguez would later reflect that it hadn't truly come out of nowhere. Emma had been growing progressively more confident, her speech patterns normalizing, her interactions with Valor becoming more complex and emotionally nuanced. The child had even begun drawing pictures during her sessions, creating artwork that showed her internal emotional landscape. On this particular afternoon in late August, The weather was warm and pleasant, and Rodriguez had suggested they spend time in the police station's small garden courtyard. Emma had been enthusiastic about the idea, and she arrived at the facility practically vibrating with energy. She wore a new dress, pink with white polka dots, and her hair was styled with fresh ribbons that matched. Sarah had begun paying attention to such details again, taking care with her daughter's appearance in ways she hadn't been able to manage during the darkest months of Emma's silence. "Valor and I are going to play a special game today," Rodriguez told Emma as they settled into the garden area. "Would you like to play?" Emma nodded eagerly. "What game?" she asked, her voice now strong and clear, barely a whisper of the hesitant speech pattern she had exhibited just weeks earlier. "It's called the story game," Rodriguez explained gently, sitting down on a bench and inviting Emma to sit beside her. Valor stretched out on the grass nearby, his golden fur gleaming in the afternoon sun. "In the story game, we can talk about things that happened, things we remember, things we want to talk about. And Valor listens to everything. He's a very good listener." Emma considered this, her small hand absently stroking Valor's head. Rodriguez had intentionally not used any language about the accident or the trauma. She wasn't pushing Emma toward any particular narrative. She was simply creating a safe container, a space where Emma could express whatever she needed to express, should she choose to do so. "Can I tell Valor about my dream?" Emma asked suddenly. "Of course," Rodriguez said, her heart rate increasing slightly. She had learned to recognize these moments, these openings when a child was ready to begin processing deeper material. "What dream?" "The bad dream," Emma said quietly, her eyes fixed on Valor. "The dream about the car and the man." This was it. This was the moment. Rodriguez remained perfectly calm and still, knowing that any reaction from her, shock, excitement, urgency, could cause Emma to shut down again. Instead, she simply nodded. "Valor would like to hear about your dream," she said gently. "Would you like to tell him?" Emma took a deep breath. She leaned down close to Valor's ear, and in a voice that was barely audible even to Rodriguez, who was sitting just a few feet away, Emma began to speak. "Bad dream," she whispered into the dog's fur. "I was playing. The butterflies was pretty. Then the car came, very fast. The car hit the man. The man fell down. It was scary. The car went away very fast." Rodriguez felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Emma was describing the accident, not in response to questioning, not because she had been prompted, but because she had chosen to share it with Valor. The dog remained perfectly still, his brown eyes steady and compassionate, his body language communicating unconditional acceptance of whatever Emma needed to express. "The man was bleeding," Emma continued, her voice growing slightly stronger as she spoke. "Mommy was scared. Everyone was scared. I was scared. And then I couldn't talk anymore. My voice went away." Rodriguez, watching carefully, saw Emma's small body tremble slightly. Valor, responding to the child's distress with the intuitive sensitivity that defined him, shifted his position and pressed his entire body against Emma's side, providing what therapists called deep pressure stimulation. The weight and warmth of the dog's body seemed to ground Emma, to anchor her as she navigated this difficult emotional terrain. "Bad uncle was there," Emma whispered, and Rodriguez's mind immediately went to Detective Webb. This was the crucial detail, the identification of who had been present, who might have been involved. "Bad uncle drove the car. I saw him. I saw his face in the car window. He looked at me and then he went fast away." Rodriguez maintained her composure, though internally she was processing the significance of what Emma had just revealed. The child had witnessed not just the accident but the identity of the driver. Thomas Chen had not only hit Mr. Rodriguez but had looked directly at his niece and then fled the scene. It was a detail that would be powerful in court, that would demonstrate consciousness of guilt, that would corroborate the physical evidence Detective Webb had been assembling. But Rodriguez's primary concern remained Emma's emotional well-being, not the legal implications of her testimony. "Thank you for telling Valor," she said softly. "That was very brave. Those were scary things to remember." Emma pulled away from the dog slightly and looked up at Rodriguez, her dark eyes filled with tears but also with something else. Relief, perhaps, or the cathartic release that comes from finally speaking the unspeakable. "Will bad uncle hurt someone again?" she asked, her 3-year-old mind grappling with concepts of justice and safety that were far too complex for her age. "No," Rodriguez said with absolute certainty. "The police and the grown-ups will make sure he doesn't hurt anyone. Your job is just to be a kid and to keep healing. Valor and I are very proud of you for being so brave." Emma collapsed against Valor's side, emotionally exhausted by the effort of articulating her trauma. The dog remained absolutely still, providing comfort through his steadfast presence. Rodriguez sat quietly, allowing Emma the space to process and integrate what she had just experienced. This was the work of healing, not easy or simple, but profound and necessary. When Sarah came to pick up Emma an hour later, Rodriguez pulled her aside before the child rejoined them. "Emma had a significant breakthrough today," she explained, choosing her words carefully. "She processed some of the traumatic material through her play with Valor. She's expressed memories of the accident and she's been very brave about it. She may be emotionally tired tonight, and that's normal. Healing work is exhausting work." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of what had occurred. "Did she say anything about—" Sarah trailed off, glancing at her daughter playing gently with Valor across the room. "About the identity of the driver," Rodriguez completed carefully. "Yes, she did. And I think you should contact Detective Webb. I believe Emma may be ready to provide a formal statement, though we'll need to move slowly and carefully to ensure her emotional safety throughout that process." That evening, Detective Webb received a phone call from David Chen. His voice trembled slightly as he relayed what Officer Rodriguez had told them. That Emma had remembered, that Emma had seen Thomas's face, that Emma appeared to be in a place emotionally where she might be able to talk to law enforcement about what had happened. Webb felt a surge of relief and gratitude. Justice and healing, it seemed, might finally be able to move forward together. But more importantly, a little girl had found her voice again, and in doing so, she had found the strength to speak truth to power. That ultimately was the real victory. The Multnomah County Courthouse was a grand, imposing structure of marble and stone, designed to inspire both respect and a certain amount of intimidation. It had been constructed in the early 1900s, and its architecture conveyed the gravity and permanence of justice. For most people, stepping into such a space provoked a mix of emotions: awe, anxiety, solemnity. For a 3-year-old child, it could be utterly terrifying. But Emma Chen would not be facing that courtroom alone. 3 months had passed since Emma's breakthrough moment in the police station garden. In that time, Detective Webb, Officer Rodriguez, and the district attorney's office had moved carefully and deliberately to prepare Emma for her testimony. There had been interviews, gentle, non-coercive conversations where Emma had recounted what she had witnessed. There had been consultations with child psychologists about the best ways to support her through the legal process. There had been meetings with the judge to determine whether a 3-year-old would even be allowed to testify, what accommodations would be made, how her participation would be handled with appropriate sensitivity. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a 40-year veteran of the bench who had presided over thousands of cases, had initially been skeptical about allowing such a young witness. But after reviewing the evidence and meeting with Emma in her chambers, where the child sat beside Valor and spoke clearly about what she had witnessed, Judge Hendricks had made the decision to allow Emma to testify. However, the judge had established strict parameters. Valor would be permitted to sit beside Emma during her testimony. The courtroom would be cleared of unnecessary spectators. The questioning would be limited and carefully monitored to prevent traumatic re-traumatization. The child's well-being would take absolute precedence over legal procedure. The trial of Thomas Chen had captured the attention of the local media. The story was compelling, a hit-and-run that had critically injured a beloved teacher, an investigation that had hit a wall, a traumatized 3-year-old whose voice had been stolen by trauma, and ultimately, a therapy dog who had helped restore that voice and potentially unlock the key to justice. Reporters had attempted to interview the Chen family. Photographers had staked out their home, and there was a palpable sense of public interest in how this unusual case would conclude. On the morning of Emma's testimony, the atmosphere in the courthouse was electric with anticipation. The gallery was packed with reporters, concerned citizens, and family members of both the victim and the defendant. Thomas Chen sat at the defense table, his expensive attorney beside him. The prosecutor, Margaret Sullivan, reviewed her notes one final time, her expression focused and determined. Officer Rodriguez waited in the hallway with Emma, and Detective Webb stood nearby, his presence a silent reminder that he was invested in seeing justice served, but more importantly, that he cared deeply about the little girl who was about to change the course of legal history. Emma wore her favorite dress, the pink one with white polka dots that she had worn during her breakthrough session with Valor. Her hair was styled neatly with ribbons, and her mother had chosen simple, comfortable shoes that wouldn't distract her. Sarah sat in the gallery beside David, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Michael sat on his mother's other side, old enough to understand the significance of what was about to happen, young enough to feel frightened for his little sister. When the courtroom doors opened and Officer Rodriguez led Emma into the space, an audible gasp rippled through the gallery. The sight of a tiny 3-year-old girl walking beside a golden retriever, the dog's leash held by a police officer, was startling and profound. Emma looked impossibly small against the grandeur of the courtroom, her head barely reaching the height of the witness stand. A cushion had been placed on the chair so she could see over the edge, and steps had been provided so she could climb up. Judge Hendricks spoke gently to Emma, explaining what would happen, asking if she understood, making it clear that she could indicate if she needed a break. Emma nodded solemnly, her small hand resting on Valor's head. Officer Rodriguez positioned herself just outside the jury's line of sight, the leash held loosely in her hands, her presence a constant reassurance that Emma was not alone. The prosecutor, Margaret Sullivan, approached the witness stand with a demeanor that conveyed both professionalism and compassion. She had worked extensively with Officer Rodriguez and Dr. James Morrison to develop questions that were appropriate for a 3-year-old, that wouldn't be leading or suggestive, that would allow Emma to describe what she had witnessed in her own words. "Emma," Sullivan began gently, "do you understand that you're supposed to tell the truth in this courtroom?" Emma nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice small but audible throughout the courtroom. "And do you promise to tell the truth?" "I promise," Emma replied, her eyes fixed on Valor, drawing strength from the dog's steadfast presence. Sullivan walked Emma through the events of that June afternoon carefully and methodically. "What were you doing on the day the car came?" she asked. "Playing with butterflies," Emma said, her small voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "I was in the driveway. Mommy was there. We was playing." "And then what happened?" Emma's voice grew quieter. "A car came. It was very fast. It hit the man. The man fell down. It was scary." "Did you see who was driving the car?" Sullivan asked carefully. Emma hesitated, looking toward her mother in the gallery. Sarah nodded encouragement. Valor shifted slightly, pressing against the child's leg, and Emma took a deep breath. "I saw Uncle Tommy," she said. "He was in the car. He looked at me, and then he went away very fast." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The defense attorney stood up, but Judge Hendricks raised her hand, silencing any objection before it could be voiced. Sullivan continued with a few more questions, allowing Emma to describe additional details: the color of the car, the sound it made, the direction it went. Each answer was clear and consistent, the testimony of a child who had witnessed something significant and was now finally able to articulate what she had seen. Then came the cross-examination, the moment that everyone in the courtroom had been dreading. Thomas Chen's attorney, a shark of a man named Robert Caldwell who had a reputation for aggressive tactics, stood and approached the witness stand. Judge Hendricks watched him carefully, ready to intervene if he became inappropriate or threatening. "Emma," Caldwell began, his tone artificially friendly in a way that made several jury members visibly tense. "Isn't it true that you were very far away and couldn't possibly see clearly who was driving the car?" "I saw him," Emma said firmly, surprising everyone with the strength in her voice. "I saw his face." "But you were playing with butterflies, weren't you? You were distracted." "I saw him," Emma repeated, and Valor, sensing the child's distress at being questioned aggressively, stood up slightly, positioning himself protectively in front of the witness stand. The dog's movement was subtle but unmistakable, a four-legged defense of the child who was his charge. Judge Hendricks leaned forward. "Counsel, I'd advise you to adjust your approach. This is a 3-year-old child, not a hostile witness." Caldwell tried a few more lines of questioning, but Emma remained steadfast in her testimony. She had seen what she had seen. She knew who had been driving the car. And crucially, the jury could see in her demeanor, in her consistency, in the way she drew strength from Valor's presence, that she was telling the truth. A simple, uncomplicated truth that a child had witnessed and had finally been able to articulate. When the prosecutor asked if she had any final statement, Emma looked directly at her uncle sitting at the defense table. Thomas's face had gone ashen, his attorney's aggressive strategy having backfired spectacularly. The jury was looking at him with visible disgust. "Bad uncle hurt the man," Emma said simply, her small voice filling the courtroom with the clarity and directness of childhood truth. "Bad uncle drove the car very fast. Bad uncle didn't stop. Bad uncle left the man on the ground." As Officer Rodriguez guided Emma from the witness stand, the little girl reached down and hugged Valor tightly, burying her face in his golden fur. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, moved by the courage and vulnerability they had just witnessed. A jury member wept openly. Several reporters were visibly affected by what they had seen. The trial continued with closing arguments and jury deliberation, but everyone in that courtroom knew that Emma's testimony had been the turning point. Her simple, direct words had cut through legal complexity and procedural maneuvering to reveal one fundamental truth. Thomas Chen had caused great harm, and he had attempted to escape accountability for his actions. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came in the smallest packages, delivered by the most unlikely witnesses. A 3-year-old girl and her golden retriever companion, speaking truth in a courtroom designed to obscure it. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 47 minutes. In the deliberation room, the evidence was overwhelming. The paint chips from the scene matching Thomas Chen's vehicle, the traffic camera footage showing a dark blue Nissan Altima fleeing the area, the witness testimony from Sarah Chen about seeing the car strike Mr. Rodriguez, and most importantly, Emma's clear, consistent identification of her uncle as the driver. The defense attorney's aggressive cross-examination of a 3-year-old had backfired spectacularly, making jury members sympathetic to the child and skeptical of anyone who would attack her credibility. When the jury returned to deliver their verdict, the courtroom was standing room only. Reporters lined the gallery, cameras positioned strategically to capture every moment. The Chen family sat together, holding hands, their faces etched with the tension and hope of people whose lives hung in the balance. Mr. Rodriguez, the victim, sat in a wheelchair in the front row, his wife beside him. He had suffered permanent injuries from the hit and run, chronic pain, limited mobility, the psychological trauma of nearly being killed. For months, he had wondered if the person who had done this to him would ever be held accountable. Now, finally, there was a possibility of justice. Judge Hendricks called for order and the courtroom fell silent. The jury foreman, A middle-aged woman named Susan Martinez, who worked as a high school counselor, stood to deliver the verdict. Her voice was clear and unwavering as she read the charges: reckless assault, vehicular hit and run, criminal negligence causing serious injury. On the charge of reckless assault, we find the defendant guilty. A small sound escaped from Sarah Chen's throat. Relief, vindication, the beginning of closure. On the charge of vehicular hit and run, we find the defendant guilty. Thomas Chen's face crumpled. His attorney's jaw clenched. The defense had failed spectacularly. On the charge of criminal negligence causing serious injury, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Reporters began speaking urgently into their phones and recording devices. Family members of Mr. Rodriguez embraced each other, tears streaming down their faces. Judge Hendricks gavelled for order, her expression satisfied. She had known the verdict was coming. Everyone in that courtroom had known it once Emma spoke her truth. Thomas Chen was remanded into custody to await sentencing. He would face up to 5 years in prison, though the judge indicated that given the severity of the crime and the victim impact, sentencing would likely approach the maximum. As officers led him from the courtroom in handcuffs, he didn't look at his niece or his family. He simply stared straight ahead, his expression blank, his face the color of ash. But the moment that would be replayed on local news stations across Portland, the moment that would become the iconic image of this case, came as Emma emerged from the courthouse steps with her parents. The little girl broke free from her mother's hand and ran directly to Officer Rodriguez, who was waiting on the courthouse plaza with valor. Without hesitation, Emma threw her arms around the golden retriever's neck and held on with fierce intensity. "Thank you, Valor," she whispered into the dog's fur, loud enough for the nearby reporters to hear. "Thank you for helping me find my voice." Photographers captured the image from every angle. A tiny girl in a pink polka dot dress, her arms wrapped around a golden retriever, the symbol of trauma overcome, of healing through unexpected means, of the power of unconditional love to restore what had been broken. The image would appear on the front page of the Portland Oregonian, would be shared across social media thousands of times, would become the visual representation of a story that had captured the hearts of people across the city and beyond. Over the following weeks, the media attention intensified. News outlets ran feature stories about Valor and Officer Rodriguez, about the therapeutic power of human-animal bonding, about the remarkable recovery of a traumatized child. The Portland Police Department received commendations for their innovative approach to victim support. Dr. James Morrison, Emma's child psychologist, was interviewed about trauma response in young children and the efficacy of animal-assisted therapy. The case became a landmark example of how unconventional approaches could sometimes succeed where traditional methods had failed. But for the Chen family, the most important part wasn't the media attention or the legal victory. The most important part was watching their daughter flourish. 6 months after Emma's testimony, she had been fully reintegrated into her preschool. She participated in class activities, raised her hand to answer questions, and played freely with other children during recess. Her teacher reported that Emma was one of the most engaged and enthusiastic students in the classroom. The girl who had sat silently in the corner just months earlier was now the one organizing group games, suggesting activities, and making friends with uninhibited enthusiasm that reminded her parents of who she had been before the trauma. Her speech, once stolen by fear, had returned not just functionally but robustly. Emma talked constantly, narrating her day, asking endless questions, singing songs, telling stories. Her parents, who had once feared they would never hear their daughter's voice again, now sometimes joked about her rediscovered loquaciousness. Michael, her older brother, had become her devoted companion again, and the two siblings were inseparable, their bond strengthened by what they had endured together as a family. Emma continued her therapeutic sessions with Dr. Morrison, though now they took place only once a month rather than weekly. The focus had shifted from trauma processing to developmental support and ensuring healthy adjustment. Emma drew pictures less frequently, and when she did, they no longer depicted scenes of violence and fear. Instead, her artwork showed families, flowers, rainbows, and always, prominently featured in the corner of every drawing, a golden retriever. The relationship between Emma and Valor continued to deepen. Officer Rodriguez brought Valor to visit the Chen family monthly, and these visits had become the highlight of Emma's month. The girl would wait by the window for hours on the day of the visit, and when the police vehicle pulled up, she would run outside shrieking with joy. Valor would reciprocate her enthusiasm with gentle exuberance, and the two would play together, their bond transcending the original therapeutic context to become a genuine, joyful friendship. Detective Webb and Officer Rodriguez became family friends. They were invited to Emma's 4th birthday party, where Emma insisted that Valor wear a special bandana decorated with balloons. At the party, surrounded by her friends and family, Emma gave a toast, a short, simple, age-appropriate speech thanking Valor for helping me when I was scared and helping me find my voice again. Several adults at the party cried openly at the eloquence and maturity of her words. Mr. Rodriguez, the victim, also became part of the extended circle of people invested in Emma's well-being. Despite his injuries and ongoing physical therapy, he made a point of sending Emma cards and gifts regularly. At one of Officer Rodriguez's visits, Mr. Rodriguez came along in his wheelchair, and Emma sat on his lap while Valor rested his head on the man's arm. It was a moment of profound healing. Victim and witness, united by the trauma they had shared, now finding solace in each other's presence and in the presence of the dog who had helped them both. Sarah and David Chen found themselves transformed by their daughter's recovery. Sarah had returned to her job as a graphic designer, her confidence restored by witnessing her daughter's courage and resilience. David had become an advocate for animal-assisted therapy programs, speaking at community events about the unexpected ways healing could occur. The couple recommitted to their marriage and to creating a home environment where their children could thrive. 1 year after Emma's testimony, the Portland Police Department officially recognized Officer Jenna Rodriguez and Valor for their exceptional work in victim support. They were featured in the department's annual report, and Rodriguez was nominated for a statewide award for innovation in law enforcement. But Rodriguez, when asked about the recognition, always redirected the conversation to Valor. "This dog didn't do this for recognition or accolades," she would say. "He did what he was born to do. He offered unconditional love and presence to someone who desperately needed it. That's the real heroism here." Emma Chen grew up with the knowledge that her voice mattered, that her truth had power, that speaking up could change the world. She became a confident, articulate child who was unafraid to advocate for herself and others. In elementary school, she was known as the student who always spoke up for kids who were being bullied, who made sure every child felt included, who understood intuitively that isolation and silence could damage the human spirit. Years later, when Emma was in high school, she would write an essay about her experience for a college application. She wrote about trauma and recovery, about the power of animals to heal, about the importance of listening to all voices, even the smallest ones. She wrote about how a golden retriever named Valor had helped her find her voice when she thought it was lost forever, and how that recovery had shaped everything she had become. The case of the 3-year-old girl who spoke 2 words to a police dog became the stuff of local legend in Portland. It was a story told in criminal justice classes about the importance of unconventional approaches and victim-centered justice. It was a story told in therapy and psychology programs about the power of animal-assisted healing. It was a story told in police academies about compassion in law enforcement. But most importantly, it was a story that lived in the heart of one little girl who had learned that even in the darkest moments, even when your voice has been stolen by fear, there are beings who will help you find it again. Emma Chen, the silent child who had witnessed violence and trauma, had learned the most important lesson of her life, that speaking truth, even when afraid, could lead to healing. Not just her own healing, but justice for others, protection for the vulnerable, and the kind of justice that honored both the victim and the witness, both the law and the human heart. And Valor, the golden retriever who had asked nothing but offered everything, had fulfilled his purpose in the most beautiful way possible, not by solving a crime, but by helping a child reclaim her voice, her joy, and her future. In doing so, he had reminded everyone who knew this story that sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from doctors or lawyers or judges, but from the simple, unconditional presence of a dog who knew exactly when to be still, when to offer comfort, and when to stand protectively beside someone brave enough to speak their truth.